Good afternoon. This is Brenda Martinez of AccuComp Enterprises. As part of our impact of AccuComp, we have invited our friends to discuss their backgrounds and how they have been impacted by racial disparities. I will start with Donald.
My name is Donald. I am a kid from Harlem, and I had always grown up with people that looked like me. If you hear anything about Harlem, the Renaissance, you think about black people. You think about music. You think about literary giants and all of those things. But Harlem over time has changed, due to a host of socioeconomic phenomena that seems to be putting people that look like me under assault. I would say that from a tough neighborhood, working class neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, I didn't know about the discrepancy of wherewithal of money because I had a very loving family. I was very fortunate to have both of my parents. And just growing up as a young black male, you kind of don't notice those differences until you come into contact with people of other cultural and ethnic backgrounds. The first time I can recall actually really interacting with kids that didn't look like me was when my father took me downtown to a prestigious karate school that I had become a member of. And I saw students of all walks of life, different walks of life, different again ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, and what have you. But it wasn't so much a culture shock. It's just these weren't kids from my neighborhood, but everyone seemed to be fairly friendly. We got along. We rose through the ranks together, and that kind of mixed into like my first real run-in with racism. Like I said, all the kids, we were around the same age. We were progressing through the ranks the same. We would help one another. The master of the dojo was Korean American male, an international grandmaster, very respected. So it was a reputed school. But I recall one session particularly when we were going to progress to the next rank, how one of the instructors in particular didn't seem like he wanted to teach me what I needed to know to pass on to the next rank. But I saw him taking extra time and care with some of the white kids, and he was a white male, of course, but, I thought nothing of it. I just said, okay, well, maybe he just doesn't have time, or maybe, the folks paid for extra lessons for this attention or what have you. But I noticed that as things progressed, this is how it would go on. So we fast forward to my next degree, my belt test, and I didn't do as well, and so I was crushed, but you pick yourself up. You say, okay, well, there are things that I need to work on, and you look at it like, okay, I have to merit this. I have to be able to do this. I just didn't pass muster. But then, I saw after that, the kids that actually looked like me that needed help, there was starting to be like a gap that was just starting to be created by the adults in the room. And you wonder, okay, well, is it because is something wrong? Why is this teacher suddenly taking like a different tack? And you just, as a kid, you don't have the words for it. And it's funny that as an adult, I've never really confronted it.
So I'm Soraya. I am African American and Puerto Rican from New York City. I like Donald. Well, I've always resided in the Bronx, but never really became a part of my community. I always went to school, and I started out in Riverdale, which is a more elite section of the Bronx, and then on the Upper West Side. So I never, so as far as my early experience, I grew up, amongst people that looked like me, but I was always in school with people who did not look like me. So I've always kind of had that balance. It didn't really wasn't really a big deal. My dad had a best friend who was a Caucasian that had kids that we used to travel to their home in Vermont. So like race was never kind of a big thing. We were like one big family growing up. It wasn't until my parents back in the early 90s purchased a home in Pennsylvania. So right now it's a little more popular to have a home in the Poconos. Back then it was not. So we were one of the only families of color in that community. And I remember my dad, I must have been about 11 years old, dropping a few of us off to the pool in the community pool over there. And he was going to drop us off and come pick us up. And we got out the car, went over to the pool, and, we like felt like all the eyes were on us. We were like the only children of color at this pool. And it just felt like, in reflection, I don't know if they didn't want us to be there, but I felt not wanted. So immediately, like, tried to go get my dad, because of course this is before cell phones. So we like trying to like flag the car down to make sure he didn't drive off, because we did not want to stay there. And we were like, my dad said, "What do you mean you don't want to stay?" And we said, "We don't want to stay. We changed our mind." But he looked and realized why we probably changed our mind. And he was like, "No, you have every right to be here. You're good. You wanted to go to the pool. You're going to go to the pool." And, like he was just not letting us, no way, shape, or form are you ever going to feel like you don't have a right to be somewhere. So it was hard. It was hard. We went to the pool. I don't necessarily remember if I enjoyed it as much as I normally would have enjoyed going to the pool, but I remember him kind of like pushing us to like make sure that, no, you have every right to be there. We're a part of this community, and I'm not going to let anyone make you feel any other way. So that's when the first time that I guess I felt like I was in a space that, and like I said, I don't necessarily know if I wasn't wanted, but I didn't feel comfortable. Other than that, like I said, in school, into acting, everything like that, like I've always felt like I've never felt any kind of way. I never felt like I was treated any different, but that was the first time that I felt like we were the ones that stuck out. And I guess maybe in retrospect, it's because education wise, although we were very much integrated, it was still a balance. There, it was so evident that we were like the only ones there. So it was like three of us in like a pool of, and it wasn't just very welcoming. It wasn't very welcoming, It was, in that community alone, if you saw someone of color, you kind of did that head nod like, okay, we're here. You acknowledged each other because, just the kind of like you saw somebody in the supermarket, it was like, oh, there's another one of us, So that community for me was not a very welcoming community, and it didn't make me feel comfortable until I got a lot older. But I never kind of immersed myself. Like my parents loved going up there. It was escape away from being in the neighborhood, and I guess it was also a sentiment of what they were able to achieve. But I never really felt like a part of that community. So that was like the first time that I kind of realized there was a difference.
I'm Michelle. I'm Puerto Rican and Cuban. I was born in Puerto Rico. And when I was in Puerto Rico, everybody looked like me. I'm not even sure that as a little kid I was like that aware that people looked differently than me, because outside of, my Puerto Rican grandmother's very racist. Outside of the people that she had work for her, everybody was my skin tone or lighter down there. And then we went to Boston when I was 4, because my brother got meningitis when he was 9 months old. And there's no facilities for the deaf on the island. At least there weren't back then. I really doubt there are any now. Massachusetts was different, because I saw people of all sorts of different colors. My mother swears I learned to speak English on the Boston subways.
How sad.
And then I went down to we went to Miami, where I was back around, everybody that looked like me, because Miami is, Cuban heaven, so to speak. When I was older, I moved to California. That was culture shock. Because I had gotten used to, when I was in Latino communities, being around Cubans and Puerto Ricans, and Chicanos are a very different monster, and they don't like anybody who's not Chicano. So I felt really excluded from a lot of things in California. But I think the moment that sticks with me the most happened when I was about, I think we were 12. And Dad had a job in Eagle Pass when we were living in San Antonio. And we went across the border to Piedras Negras for the day. We had gone down for the weekend to visit him, and we're coming back across the border back into the United States. And we get stopped by Border Patrol, and he asks my stepmother, what is she doing trying to sneak these 2 Mexican children across the border? Because of course we can't be with her because she's African American. So there's no way that this can be okay. And my brother's freaking out in the back, sitting next to me, because he's deaf. He doesn't speak Spanish. He mainly signs, and he's freaking out. I'm watching my stepbrother freak out too, sitting next to my stepmother like, what the hell is going on? And he's talking about, well, you don't have no proof, we're going to leave them here. And she's telling them, yeah, but they don't speak Spanish anymore. And my brother's just freaking out. And I remember that they called my father and had him describe what we looked like, what were we wearing, and whatever. And ever since then, I have never gone to Mexico, ever. Have no interest. Because of this, I get this feeling, because right now I live near the border. Anytime I have to go by Border Patrol, it just leaves me with this feeling of oh my God, what are they going to do? Because they just could not believe, and they were told that we were Puerto Rican, got a supervisor, and his statement was, how do we know they're really Puerto Rican? But the one that stopped us originally was Puerto Ricans aren't citizens. And I've heard this so many times in my life, but you guys aren't citizens. And it just, after that, I have just never, it just makes me really uncomfortable to be anywhere near Border Patrol.
So I'm the person who doesn't fit any of the stereotypes. I grew up in Colorado on a ranch. My father was retired military. He bought the side of a mountain while he was training for World War II. And this was his gift to his love, which was my mother. And when they retired to this area. My father knew nothing about ranching because he had spent 30 years in the military. My parents grew up as sharecroppers. My father told me the story, which always upsets me, that where he grew up in Tennessee, it was acceptable for Black men to allow themselves to have their heads rubbed by white people. My father decided that he was not going to bend over so his head could be rubbed, because my father was a tall person. And as a result, his family totally freaked out with the idea that the KKK was going to come to where they lived and most likely burn down the little shack where he lived. So as a result, my father volunteered to leave, and that's how he wound up being in the Army. He was 15 years old, but because he was very tall and he was also African American, nobody was really worried about his age. They just decided he was 18 He wanted to be in the war. Yay! We'll take you. When my father told me this story, I was really surprised because we were the only Black family in a town of 3,000 people. Most everybody was military, so there wasn't really any overt racism because of the fact that most of the folks were just okay. I really didn't have any feelings one way or another because after my parents had adopted me, we had gone off to Japan. And if you had ever been on a military base, it's great to be an American because you're surrounded by people who are not American, so you don't really spend a lot of time thinking about it. My father was also a very progressive person and felt that why come all the way to Japan to behave like an American? You have to go to a Japanese school, which I personally happen to love because I was taller than everybody at the school. So I was really thrilled. I was like, gargantuan. When we came back to Colorado, I sort of had an idea that the whole world was very different and you just had to kind of go with the flow. So when I was in second grade, I was doing a playground using the swings, and a gentleman came, a young kid, second grader, came along, and he wanted to use the swing that I was on, and he used the N word to ask me to move. Unfortunately, I reacted badly to him saying that word, and I punched him, which resulted in the whole idea that both my father and his father came to talk to the principal, and my father said, what's the problem? He said a bad word, she punched him, end of discussion. My feelings about it was that I was more than happy to go with my father's understanding. And it turned out that the principal had the same understanding, that, when you say something that isn't appropriate and something bad happens to you, you shouldn't come to school and complain about it. Well, I'm going to wrap it up with one of the things that brought me to tears was at George Floyd's Houston burial. His second grade teacher had the poem or whatever he wrote that said he wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, and she had saved it all these years. And as you listen to what happened to George Floyd and how his life just absolutely fell apart, you think back and say, what happened to that kid who thought he could be a Supreme Court justice? What things occurred in his life that made it so he stopped seeing himself as a winner and became a victim? Because I have to admit that the one thing I want to do as a parent, as a grandparent, is to teach, do not be a victim. No matter what happens to you, and I have seen my children misbehave on many a occurrence, behind closed doors, they would be reprimanded for their behavior, but not in public. You take issue with my kid, you have to come through me. And that has been the way in which I raised my children, because I know that the world will be hard on them. I know that it will be unequal and unjust. I hope that I live long enough to be able to see that somehow a child can be a child and people can be judged by their capabilities, that everybody gets a chance at making their dreams come true.